Thank you all for joining us for the Critical Reading Workshop. Joining us today is Samantha Gudby from the from the libraries. I'm going to hand it over to her to get us started. Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. I know everyone has their microphone muted for the recording in particular, but please do feel free to unmute yourself at any time to ask questions. I also, I know it can be, you may not want to share, to turn on your video. I know it can feel good to step back and observe, but I welcome you to turn on your video so that I can see you. I will assume that behind your names there are smiling faces and that you are here paying attention and participating. I will be asking some questions and hoping for you to participate, and actually, I'm hoping that we can interact with one another over the next hour and talk about the reading that you do, the work that you do. I am Samantha Godby. I am the education librarian. My office usually is in Lead Library, the main research library on campus. For nearly a year now, I've spent quite a lot of time in this room in my home. I hope everyone is doing well and staying healthy, and you and your loved ones are weathering the challenges of the past year with grace and good health. So we are here today to talk about critical reading. As I said, I'm the education librarian. Just to, before I dive into the critical reading, just to clarify my role, I'm the research librarian for the College of Education. I also work with the psychology department. So my work really is to support the research and teaching of the students and faculty in research and psychology. So working with students on, to help them with their research. And prior to becoming a librarian, I've been a librarian now for, this is my 7th or 8th year. Prior to becoming a librarian, I was a high school English teacher. And so I've done a lot of teaching in my professional career, and work with people around reading and learning to read and loving to read, both things for pleasure and sources for their research. So today we're going to talk about critical reading, and there will be soon, if not already, a handout shared in the Canvas course, in the Web Campus course, that you can have a copy of, but I'll go ahead and share it so that you can take a look at, let me open this. You can follow along on my screen. So hopefully, let me know if not. And of course, like I said, please do feel free to unmute yourselves to ask a question or ask any questions that you have in the chat. This is the handout. We're here to talk today about critical reading. And when I talk about critical reading, what I'm talking about is really reading with a critical approach, which sounds kind of self-referential, but really it's about engaging with a text. And because, I'm sure you've had this experience when you're reading that, we read so much in academic work, so many pages, so many pages sometimes. It can be easy if you kind of go into many of these scholarly texts. It can be easy to find yourself reading and the words kind of pass you by. And so if you're not actively engaging with the text, it can be easy to waste your time and not get as much out of your time with that text as you otherwise might. And so the best way to do this is to really actively consider both the author's goals in writing that text, as well as your own goals and questions that you bring to the reading that you're doing. And the way, the structure that I'll provide to you is this 5-step process. So there's a 5-step process that is out there, that exists, that you can take from this what is helpful to you to read critically. So you may not do this every time you read everything, but it's a process that you may take some of this with you and at least do some of it. At least some of this will be helpful to you, I think, as you read things in the future. And actually, before we dig into this much further, I want to pause for a second, and I'm going to stop sharing for a sec. And maybe just in the chat, I want to check in with folks. I want to find out a little bit more about all of you and who you are, what your disciplines are. So to get a better sense of the kinds of sources that you're reading. So if you could just type in the chat what your discipline is and a little bit about the kinds of reading you do. So that could be a brief statement about the project you're working on, or if you want to say the kinds of, if you're reading a ton of scholarly articles, or if you're at a certain stage in your dissertation, kind of where you are. And please, yes, feel free to unmute yourself if you'd rather just say it out loud. Okay, so we have a a number of people reading kind of standard scholarly articles, folks focusing on statistical analysis or methodology components of the articles. It's interesting, Matthew, the MFA stage automation technology. I have a couple of good friends who are in the circus. So that's interesting to me. As a librarian, I end up doing, so for my own work, my own research, I read, have been reading particular kind of, been working on a lit review that involves reading lots of scholarly articles related to library and higher education statistics around higher education and library funding. But because of my work in helping different people with their research, I end up reading lots of different kinds of articles very frequently. Last time I did this workshop, we had quite a few people, maybe more than half of the people actually were humanities, in the humanities, and they were reading more book length works. So that takes a different approach to reading than short scholarly articles. So it's helpful to see. And Jung-Yoon, most likely statistical application in the phylogenomic and so are those, I maybe don't quite understand your shorthand from your field. Are those scholarly articles, or are they kind of more data sets? Okay. Great. Because I know that that's going to be different too, right? So depending on the type of information source as well, you're going to take a different approach. All right, thank you everyone. That's really helpful to know. So the first step, so coming back to this 5-step process, let me come back to our handout here. So the first step is to prepare. So your purpose for reading, what is your purpose for reading? Actually, I'd like to, if you could unmute yourselves. I just had you share a little bit in the chat. You could do this in the chat if you really wanted, but it'll be nice to speak, I think. What are some of the purposes that you all have for reading? The various things that you do. Why do you read the things you read? So we have some of these purposes that we identified are to gain knowledge, to learn more about our topic, to confirm assertions that we have either encountered already, or that maybe we have certain assertions. We want to be more knowledgeable about our fields. We are also trying to pick up an academic writing style, whether English is our first language or not. for none of us is this style of academic writing our first language. So we're learning how to speak and navigate this academic style of writing, and how to write about our fields in the way that experts in our field write about this topic. So there's lots of different purposes that we might have for reading a particular source. We also have externally imposed purposes. I'm a professional, but I still have externally imposed purposes. My department chair will give us something that we need to read to discuss for a department meeting. You have professors who assign readings. It may not be a reading that you would choose of your, if given free choice over how to spend your time, you might not have chosen that particular 30 or 40 page article to read. So sometimes you have a purpose that is not really aligned with your ideal for how you might spend your time. But that purpose is going to guide how you approach that article or that book or that technical paper or that interview that you're going to engage with. And some of the ways that you all have already talked about how you're reading. When you put in the chat some of the things that you read, I'm reading scholarly articles, but mostly the lit review section or mostly the methodology section. Some of you are already giving clues that you're already directing your attention to specific sections of the things you're reading based on your purposes. So that's a good sign that you're directing your attention in helpful ways. But it's really helpful to you to identify that purpose right as you get started. Right. So this is your preparation. This is that first step. Just real quick, like seconds you spend at the beginning. Why am I reading this? What's my purpose for reading it? And then you do a quick preview. And if you just do these two things before you start reading something, you will really save yourself a lot of time and help yourself be critical, help yourself be more efficient as well as you read. So there's some questions here that again, you'll have this handout for yourself, but you can look for things like, what can the title tell me about the text? How is the text structured? What are the author's main points? You can look out for the author's thesis. So if it's a scholarly article, you can skim through the scholarly article. Are there the standard, is it a research article with the standard headings? So actually on the third page here, I have here just the third page of the handout is the basic anatomy of a standard research report where a scholarly article in which they're reporting the results of a research study. Standard structure will look like this, where they start out with giving the title, author, and contact info. They have an abstract, an introduction, and literature review. They go into the methods, then the results, discussion, conclusion, then the references. So first thing I do whenever I look at a research article is I flip through the pages or scroll through the pages, and I look to see, do the headings look like this? And if they do, takes me less than a minute, takes me 30 seconds. I flip through to see, are these the sections? If they're not, I'm looking to see what is there. Because maybe, if it's qualitative articles, sometimes it looks a little different because maybe they've broken it down thematically and the sections are a little bit different. Maybe I thought they were sharing the results of a research study, and actually it turns out that it was the abstract was kind of vague, and it turns out that this is actually a literature review. Maybe sometimes the abstract is a little misleading, and as I go to read it, sometimes they've actually kind of compressed 2 studies into a single article, and it gets a little confusing. This happens, I often encounter this when I'm working with students. I'm meeting with a student and they're like, and they're kind of confused, especially undergraduates. They'll be like, I have this article and I don't know what's going on. And I often will see that there's two studies that are being reported and they repeat certain sections. And so just doing that initial skim through to see, does it look like this? Does it look like this structure? Saves me a lot of trouble before I actually dig in and start reading. If it's not a research article, right? So if it's a different kind of source that I'm reading, so if it's a book, for example, I have some books nearby. If it's a book, then I can do the same thing, right? If it's a book that I'm reading for a scholarly purpose, for an academic purpose, I can do the same thing by tackling the table of contents, right? I look at the table of contents. I might kind of skim through the introduction. I might go back and look at the end matter to see if there are extensive notes that might be useful to me, or a timeline, or this one has a really extensive index. So depending on the topic, or I can see in this one, it actually has quite a lot of photographs and different, I'm blanking on the word, kind of figures and things throughout the book. So depending on my purpose, that quick, like even for a very large text like this, that quick orientation to the text is going to save me a lot of effort, right? It's going to allow me to prepare for actually engaging with the text in a more meaningful way. Okay, so these are those first 2 steps. Let me go back up. Does that make sense for those first couple of steps, where you're preparing by thinking of your purpose and then doing a quick preview? Any questions about those first couple of Someone unmuted, was there a question? Okay. And again, these things are going to work in tandem. They're going to work together, because if my purpose is imposed by someone else, if my purpose is, my professor told me that I have to do a discussion post in which I summarize the methodology, then I'm doing that preview so that I can see, so that I can make sure that I've identified a research article, an empirical research article, and I've found the methodology section, right? So that's allowing me to figure out what's what real quick. But if my purpose is general I want to be more knowledgeable about my field and I've identified this article, then I'm going to do that, I'm going to skim, do that preview, and I'm going to look at the headings of the sections of the lit review, and I'm going to kind of take a quick look at the lit review and see, oh, this section of the lit review, that's especially interesting to me. And I'm going to kind of note that as something I'm going to come back and read carefully, right? So I'm going to have a slightly different approach based on what my purpose is. Okay. But that preview lets me know what I'm dealing with. Because otherwise, if I just start reading on the first word and get going, especially with this, with these tiny print, dense academic articles, before you know it, a lot of the time, especially if it's late at night, like the thing is due the next day, or you're trying to squeeze in one more article, before you know it, time has passed and you don't know what you've read. So quick purpose, quick preview, and then you start reading, right? And you'll read the parts that align with your purpose, and you're going to annotate. And the annotation is important. You're going to make notes on the text as you read it more closely. So you did a very quick read of sorts in that preview. You glanced it over, and now you're going to read it more carefully. And there's some detailed suggestions here about things you might mark up as you read. Mark what makes sense to you, right? So you might mark the thesis or other main points. I usually, in research articles that I'm reading, I like to, if I've printed it out, I put a box around the thesis. If I haven't printed it out, I just use Adobe and I highlight the thesis. The idea is that you're making signposts that help you to organize the text for yourself, for future you, right? Because you're wanting to help yourself out for when you look at this again later, right? So there's some other suggestions here. So you might underline important words or ideas. You can write questions and comments in the margins. I often write notes about connections to other sources that I've read or other ideas that I've come across, things that things that don't quite make sense, or if I notice that the sources are very, other sources that I want to track down. I in the lit review section, I see something that they comment on a study, and that I want to find that study, so I'll circle that or highlight that as something I want to track down. Or they might mention a source that sounds unexpected to me, that a study they refer to doesn't quite align with the other things I've read. So I make notes about this on the text. But again, the idea of this is to make notes that are helpful to you, so that when you look back at this, it's useful. I like to, and I discourage you from just underlining, or highlighting just at length, right? Because I did this when I was in college. I tell students, I majored in a foreign language, and I would just I would circle all these words that I was planning to look up later. So I read books, in a different language, and a language that was not my original language, and I would plan on looking up all these words, and I felt so, like I felt like I was doing work, circling all those words, and I would not look them up, right? Like, but I would come and I felt like while I was doing it, like that was work that I was doing, but that was not helpful to me, right? So I would look at, I look at those, I have a book, and it's just underlines, so many underlines, right? That's not useful to me anymore, but the parts where I actually wrote questions and comments, like that's useful to me. I can go back to that and actually engage with that, like as future me, even, many years down the road, I can engage with that. And you don't necessarily need to guarantee for, decades down the road but even like days later, I'm sure you've encountered this. I encounter this now. Like I'm reading, I'm reading an article. If I just highlight things in an article and I look at it days later and I look at it and I don't know, I might, it is likely that I don't remember why I highlighted or underlined a particular passage, right? Unless I actually write a comment about that. If you just highlight or underline, it is likely that you will forget why that was important to you. So you want to either have, you might come up with a system. So like if the box means that's the thesis, or red means that's the thesis, or yellow stands for something in particular, or green, you might come up with a system that means certain things for you. But you want to mark it up in a way that's useful to you. So you're critically engaging, right? So you've got a purpose in mind. You've done a quick preview. You're reading it, marking it up. Fourth and fifth steps would be to step back and look at it. So look at it again. The source that I got these 5 steps from recommends that you would actually read it again. They suggest maybe rereading the whole article if it's an important one to you, maybe just the abstract to help you kind of pull it all together, but to kind of look at your annotations and pull those together. So, and that is in order to move on to the 5th step, which is to respond in some way, to articulate what you got out of it and what you think is important. So what I do for this is to either type, sometimes just at the top of the document if I have the PDF, or I'll write it on top of a printed out article. If I am, depending on my project, like if it's a larger project and I have a document that I'm keeping notes on multiple sources in a research log, I'll put it just in the Word document. I'll put some bullet points, but I just put a couple of bullet points about that article, about the main things I got out of that. So why do I think it's important? Is this, having looked at the whole, so I have my little notes, right? So when I come back to actually use it, I have my little notes on it so that I can draw little details from it when I need them. But overall, I want to have a couple of notes, 1 to 3. About the main things. So is this going to be, so some of these notes might be that this is like an excellent example of, focus group methodology, right? Or, I really appreciated how how they described the focus group consent process. This is, you know, for the lit review, I'm working on a particular project and I'm going to use it for this section of the lit review, right? Or counter argument to Gonzalez article, right? So just a bullet point or two, the main thing I got out of this particular work. So I've done everything. So I've gone through it with my purpose in mind, and I've done some work of doing some detailed notes. And then at the end, I've come up with a point or two to sum it up. And there's a question in the chat: if I'm using a book as a source, would I make these points for each chapter? And the answer to that is going to depend on the kind of book it is. So with academic publishing, there's a couple of different kinds of books. So they tend to be, sometimes there are books that are single book by a single author on a topic. Those you might have a single, do this for the whole book. Lots of scholarly books are edited, where individual chapters are written by different authors, and the editor compiles the book. In that case, I might not read the whole book anyway. I might read individual chapters, and I'd probably do it separately for individual chapters that I found useful for my project, if that makes sense. I wanted to show you all an example. Actually, let me share. So did you all just see a different document show up? Because I think I'm sharing the program, so you should see this different. Do you see an article instead?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I wanted to share an example to talk a little bit more about purpose and how it affects how you read. So here's an example of an article that I read recently. So it's called Interventions to Prevent and Manage Overweight or Obesity in Preschool Children, a Systematic Review. So in your handout, I give you the link to the article so you can look up this article if you'd like. But I give you this page that gives you some examples of purpose and a little discussion of how I might direct my reading related to these different purposes. So in my role, in my work, I have some different roles, right? So as a librarian and an instructor, I might have a purpose of looking for an example article to show other people, right, to show students. So in that case, I might direct my reading to look for whether this particular article is clear. Is it a recent example? Because students don't like to look at old stuff. Is the terminology accessible to students in multiple disciplines, right? So like this particular article is about obesity. It's not, it's not like the easiest article to read, but it's not so dense and embedded in a particular discipline that it would be completely unreadable for folks in different disciplines. I'm looking to see if it has features that would be helpful for this kind of article. So systematic reviews are being used in a lot more disciplines recently. I've been working with students in lots of different disciplines on this type of article, this type of study recently. So I like to have examples, and I would want to make sure to have an example that included like this. This is something that often comes up, that helps students see what a systematic review is. So in a systematic review, you basically design a study, you design a search, and the search is your study design, right? So you design a search strategy and you don't change it. So you design a search strategy, and then you have inclusion and exclusion criteria, and you whittle that down until you have a certain number of reputable studies kind of at the end. And so this diagram is used, this Prisma flow chart is used in these articles to illustrate the process you go in going from the thousands of articles you find in your initial search down to your final articles. And so this is a research methodology, but it's also really helpful, for in different studies that you might be doing. Like if you were doing a lit review on a topic, if you come across a systematic review, it's like a gold mine because they've done the work of searching 10,000 articles. Like if you were doing a lit review on obesity, then they've searched 10,000 articles and come up with 37 that are like super high quality. So, and then they have them all listed in nice, neat tables for you, right? So this type of article is really helpful to people in a lot of different contexts. So when I'm looking for an example for different people, I'm looking for different kinds of features, right? So so just to kind of give you a quick overview of that article, but back to the my page here, so that's kind of some thinking that I might do as I'm thinking about this as a librarian. But if as a scholar, if I were looking at this article when I was putting together my own systematic review, it would depend on whether I was new to this methodology. If I was, then the methods section would be really important, right? If I was new to this topic, then I'd want to read the lit review really carefully. If I was at the stage where I was working on my search strategy, then there's the part of the article where they go into detail about their databases, their search terms. I might look at that list of the articles that I showed you kind of toward the end there. Maybe I'm not doing a systematic review. Maybe I'm a different kind of study, right? So then I would look to the final list of included studies. Maybe I have one of those purposes. Some of you mentioned something like this, right? So maybe I'm looking for a model of how to write up. I'm writing up results and I'm looking for a model, right? I want to see how they wrote up this kind of study. Or I'm writing something for this journal and I want to see how they constructed their literature review for this journal, or how they did their introduction for this journal. Or I already did, I'm almost done with my project, and I happened to come across this, and I am just looking to see if I missed any articles for a different lit review that I did. So any of these purposes is going to help me modify how I approach that reading, right? And that's going to keep me from looking at this, 20 tiny pages of article and having it wash over me, right? Because this is full of information, right? But I know we've all encountered this, right? Like where these articles are full of information, but sometimes, if you don't have a game plan, you can get nothing out of it. So when you take that critical approach, you can really, both save yourself time and also effort. So hopefully that example can be helpful to you to just see kind of in action that with the with the same exact source, you might approach it in a number of different ways. So any questions actually about that example? Okay. On the second page of the handout that you'll have, there are some tools listed for annotating PDFs. I will say, so if you don't want to print them out, I will say that the annotation in RefWorks, I kind of wish I deleted it from this. You can annotate PDFs in RefWorks, but you can't export the annotations. So I don't really recommend it in RefWorks. But there is a list of software that you can annotate. Honestly, what I use for annotating PDFs is just Adobe Acrobat. I save my PDFs on my computer. I save it in the cloud. I save my documents in the cloud, but I highlight things and make notes just in the document rather than depending on EndNote or Mendeley or RefWorks, because I find those softwares to be kind of slow as far as finding things and managing the annotations. But there are various options for annotating things on the computer. So those resources are there for you. I'll come back up here. There are options for contacting me. I'm happy to meet with any of you one-on-one if it's helpful at any point. And we have just a few minutes left. I'm happy to take any questions that you all have.